Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
Well, you might be familiar with what I think is perhaps the biggest controversy this week, and some might argue this is the biggest controversy, biggest development when it comes to the way Christians are treated in the marketplace, perhaps yet this year or this decade. Let's talk through some issues about Andrew Thorburn, who lost his job as the CEO of the Essendon Football Club, basically held the job for about a day and then was forced to resign. Bill Muehlenberg has been thinking through the issue and some of the alignments and what it might mean. Bill's back with us for another Culture Watch segment. Bill, welcome back to 2020.
Thanks again, Neil.
Bill, Andrew Thorburn, a Christian, no doubt relatively well off, having a banking background. All of a sudden, he is forced to resign from his position at the Essendon Football Club because he is aligned with a Christian church that teaches a biblical foundation. Thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, it's just the latest, right, of so many examples. We've talked plenty of them over the years, haven't we? One case after another, whether it's Israel Folau or who, you can think of so many. If you're a Christian today, you're taking your life and certainly your employment in your own hands. You're increasingly going to be asked not to be accepted to a job, or if you already have a job, if your beliefs in any way get out into the open, you risk being fired from the job. So this has now become the new normal. In Australia and the West, Christianity is taboo. If you're a Christian, you often need not apply for a new job. And if you're a Christian, your job is maybe at risk. So this is something the church needs to wake up to. We used to talk about persecution in China or North Korea. Well, it's certainly ramping up right here in Australia.
I know that listeners will know that we're often reluctant to say that persecution actually exists in Australia, but this appears to be the closest that we've come to this, because while even as you recite the example of Israel Folau, at least Israel Folau said something, posted something that was for some offensive, but Andrew Thorburn, he's just connected to a church. He didn't say anything. Yeah. They didn't ask him if he had particular perspectives on these issues. They just got rid of him.
Yep. No, well, that's it. And as you said, in this case, he's probably well off. So I suppose if push comes to shove, he can get by, probably find another position. I suppose the same with Israel Folau, fairly wealthy. And as we may discuss later, Christians have wondered, should he have stood strong and fought this, or was he right to leave? But the truth is, for many of us lesser types, us peons who don't have a large bank account, for us to suddenly find ourselves out of a job simply because of our beliefs, or worse yet, simply the beliefs of a church that we happen to be a part of, that's serious stuff indeed. That sounds like persecution to me, when you can't even at least readily feed your own family because of your Christian viewpoint. Well, guess what? That's persecution. It's certainly discrimination. It's certainly anti-Christian bigotry, and it's ramping up all around us. So this is just the latest case of this. And while he can probably weather the storm, many of us in lesser positions, well, it's just not that easy. Losing a job is a big deal. Losing an income is important. So we can say persecution is well and truly alive and well in Australia.
Well, Bill, there are a lot of Christian business leaders who are leading companies, who are leading government departments, who have significant positions. But companies and government departments all have, these days, some sort of diversity and inclusion policy, and they may well be screening everyone who has some sort of position to say, you're welcome and you're not. Any thoughts around where this could lead?
Well, I think it's already led, past tense, to this kind of scenario where if you want to apply for a job, you have to think twice. If you disclose anything of your own Christian past, if you talk about where you might worship and so on, that is now getting to be risky business. In fact, this whole issue, I think, has been so important that in the past few days, I've actually written 4 different articles about this very issue, about not just his particular stepping aside or being hounded out, which is more accurate, but how we as Christians should think about the rise in persecution. And in one of my 4 pieces, I mention a senator from my home state of Wisconsin. Some of your listeners might know the name of Joe McCarthy. He was especially active in the 40s and 50s last century, trying to weed out communists from government. There were such things as communist infiltration of the State Department, other bodies, even, Hollywood and so on. So he was a committed Republican who didn't think having communists in American government was a good thing. It was actually treasonous, so he would try to hold inquiries and find out where people were at. Some people did lose their job. Some were vilified as a result. Now, I happen to think that in the main he was right to look at communism, but there's a very famous line that he would often ask of those he was dealing with. He would say, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States?" So in that piece I wrote a few days back, I said, well, just apply this now. We've got a woke McCarthyism in place. So more and more, if you're trying to get some new employment, you can probably expect in the job interview to hear something like this. Have you ever been, or are you now, a member of a Christian church? That's exactly how bad things have gotten, where that'll be the kind of thing they'll look for. Not your past job experience, not how well qualified you are, not how successful you may have been in other jobs, not what good character references you may have. They may be looking for one thing. Are you a Christian? And if you are, well, you need not apply here. And again, if you think that's extreme, well, just ask Andrew. He knows all about it this past week. To be a Christian is risky business.
And, Bill, not just CEOs at risk here, because if this is applied to the CEO of a football club, the Essendon Football Club in this case, what's to say that middle managers, what's to say that the players are not next? If you're a Christian, don't line up to be part of the playing squad in our AFL club.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this as well. All these various rounds, pride rounds, cultural pride, it might be a Islamic weekend or a homosexual weekend. AFL is pushing all these various pride rounds all the time, but obviously the AFL does not have any place for inclusion when it comes to Christianity. In fact, it says in their mission statement, we're really into inclusion and diversity. Well, yeah. Tell that to Christians who don't last more than 24 hours. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken in my footy knowledge, Essendon has a Muslim player who's been there a long time. And if he's any sort of a real Muslim who, accepts the teaching of his local mosque and of the Quran, guess what? On some of these moral issues that we saw Andrew being given the boot for, abortion was one, homosexuality was another. This Muslim player would hold to the very same beliefs as Andrew has, but he is, well, he's gone. The Essendon Muslim is still there. As far as I know, they never asked him, right? What does your local mosque have to say about these issues? So it really is open season on Christianity. It really is the usual double standards, hypocrisy of the secular left. Anything goes, including Islam. And by the way, they've been known to chuck LGBT people off of roofs and so on, right? But if you're a Christian, you need not apply.
Well, interesting, isn't it? Because it's not the CEO who is the face of the game, but it's the players. So one might anticipate players might be in line next to be targets. Hey, just a thought or two, though. Should Andrew Thorburn have stayed on, weathered the storm and seen that battle through, perhaps even won and then continued in the role? But he chose not to. But what are your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, well, in another one of my pieces on this matter, I looked at that very issue. There's already been plenty of debate amongst Christians. Some thought he gave in far too easily. He should have stood his ground. He should have at least, tried to put up a fight. Others thought, well, maybe he did the right thing. If he had to choose between his church and his career, well, he chose his church, so that was a good thing. So Christians are of different minds on this issue. I maybe tend to go with the former camp. I think it would have been good if he did fight a bit more. And in my article, I say there's at least two very good reasons why this is the case. One, it simply empowers the other side to do more of the same, right? If they see how easily he capitulated, how quickly he gave up, well, they're not going to stop with him, obviously. They're going to keep going and try to hound out every other Christian in any other important position. So that's one problem with the easy standing down. The other is it may kind of weaken the resolve of other Christians. If they had seen Andrew take a long, committed stand here, that might have emboldened them. It might have stiffened their spines. But when you see kind of a quick and easy standing down, it may have disillusioned some believers who may find themselves in a similar position. So, as I said in my pieces, we got to pray for him. He did what he felt was the right thing to do. So we can leave it there. But I do think, as a whole, the church needs to get more of a backbone. We need to have more spine and more willingness to stand up for our Christian beliefs and not give in so easily.
One always has to be thinking, is it in any way in the interest of the Essendon Football Club or the AFL to divide people by religion or on sexual values or over the issue of abortion? It seems to me like that can only do the game a lot of harm.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Again, most people, we've talked about this before, most people want to go on a weekend to a footy game and escape politics, escape social issues, escape the culture wars. They don't want it shoved in their face, and yet that's exactly what we keep seeing happening over and over again.
Well, Bill, always good getting your insights, and there'll be listeners who might like to follow through and look at some of the articles you've been writing about this issue through the week, enabling our enemies and empowering our persecutors. Another one called The New McCarthyism, the world's quickest case of Christophobia in action. And the first one you wrote, actually, before all of this controversy erupted, gasp, they actually hired a Christian. Well, let me point listeners to billmuehlenberg.com or simply Google Culture Watch, one word. Bill, thanks so much for the update once again today on 2020.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.